there, superstars. This is Dolly Raystar here to remind you that the map is not the territory, the menu is not the meal. So, want to come on an adventure right now and find us some good eating. Today's adventure is a bit of a different thing, actually. It's a kind of mini deep dive, maybe, perhaps just a shallow dive, I don't know, we'll see, into a topic I've been interested in exploring whilst I've been learning about the kind of work that I usually share on this channel, and they seem really interlinked to me, and that is neurodiversity, but looking at it from the perspective of an oddball agent of transformation, as somebody who perhaps has often felt that they don't fit in with the regular scheme of things in various ways that can sometimes cause real problems, but is perhaps also coming at this from a perspective of transcendence and of releasing ties and definitions and modes of looking at things that keep one trapped in a kind of web of unuseful story, I suppose. So yeah, I'd like to go into how I found this work to be useful in many ways for kind of allowing these things to unpick themselves in my understanding, and for getting much more kind of able to process the extremes of emotions and things that can go alongside some kinds of neurodivergences, and also some of the pitfalls I've encountered, some of the ways where perhaps it does help but it needs some other work alongside it and can even kind of make things more tricky in some strange ways. So yeah, just a bit of an explore of the topic, really, because I think there's some really juicy bits here. I've been quite informed in this video by Nick Walker's Neuroqueer Heresies, which I really recommend reading if you get the chance. That is a really great book, and it's laid out in a really easy to read way, I think, especially perhaps for, well, I found it really fitted well with my neurodivergence, which I guess I would identify as being probably ADHD. A sort of disclaimer as well, I'm not diagnosed with anything. I don't at the moment intend to go down that route for various reasons, which I'll probably go into a bit later on. And yeah, I'm not claiming to have any kind of master knowledge of this topic. I've been exploring it in a interested Neurospicy kind of way, but yeah, far from an expert. But it's interesting when you start to find things that come into resonance with your own experience, and also start to find things that look a little bit like holes. So all of those things are really, really interesting to me. So yeah, I'm finding it a really useful lens amongst many right now. I guess the clue to some of this is in the name of this channel, really. The map is not the territory. So for me, there is always a kind of, and it's interesting as I've been doing this work, and I think it goes alongside it very easily, naturally, there is a kind of awareness always that none of the kind of definitions that we can put on things can ever actually really grasp the true experience. That's always going to be so much more multi-layered, detailed, beautiful, curious, challenging than those things can describe. And I feel like this is an area where, from my perspective at least, that feels very, very apt. But what's interesting is that it feels like, I particularly with ADHD, I mean, that's really what I've been looking into the most, so I feel most able to talk about it. It feels like there's a kind of tendency out there in communities, and I've observed this in autistic communities as well from a bit of a distance, to kind of really hone down this stuff and get more of a kind of peer community look at what it actually is like from the inside, which is hopefully starting to inform. And it feels to me like these maps are getting better and better drawn at the moment, which is really amazing, but they're still quite rough maps perhaps. Yeah, it's all in so much of life, the things that are easily talked about and defined, but even they obviously have so much else going on than often comes out in those definitions, especially when you're talking about pathologizing something that is a inherent part of one's experience, but also in the things that are often just completely left out of that. You know, when you're talking about sensory sensitivities, for example, there are so many layers and layers to that aren't just, oh, it's a struggle to wear something with a tag in it, or I don't like this texture of this piece of clothing, or I can't cope with this texture of food, or whatever it might be. Those things are the things that really impact intensely on life. But when you're talking about a sensitivity like that, there's so much going on there, isn't there? And so much juicy life experience that can be grasped within that, I suppose. So yeah, we'll see how this ends up getting put together. It's definitely a trickier one for me for not going off on the kind of rambles that probably go alongside the kind of neurodivergence I'm talking about. But yeah, I feel like basically while I've been having this really great discovery of some of the ways that I've always felt different to a lot of other people, that I've struggled in life myself, and also that I've observed some of the people close to me having those experiences too, are often put together into a thing and given a name, and that's quite amazing. You know, it reminds me a little bit, which is quite interesting because Neuroqueer Heresies talks about this kind of connection to some extent, but it reminds me a bit of what I went through with gender a few years ago, you know, realising that some of these ways that I felt different, you know, they can actually be defined and it's not just me, and that's a really liberating, beautiful thing. And I'm sure that any one of you out there who's been on a similar kind of a journey recently with this stuff one way or another will relate to that. But I've also been in that time going into an even deeper dive into some of the risks of things like pathologizing these kind of things, diagnoses, and even just naming and defining them, which I think is really important to be able to do. I think all of those things have their place and are useful actually, but perhaps less the pathologizing. But also it's just worth keeping that awareness. The map is not the territory, you know, and using these things in the call of liberation and not restriction. So I'm going to cut out here because I feel like what I said on this didn't quite get at what I'm trying to say, which is really that it seems to me that the kind of ways in which these things are placed into boxes, the ways in which they're defined, seem a little bit hazy to me sometimes, don't necessarily seem to match up that closely with people's actual lived experiences all the time. Obviously sometimes they do, but it seems to me like there's some stuff going on here, maybe some connectivity between different kinds of neurodivergence and different aspects of what's going on with all of it that just aren't quite maybe being captured at the moment. And if that's the case, it feels really valuable to me to keep an open mind, I suppose, about what's going on here, to be able to use these kind of definitions for our own liberation, for being able to understand ourselves better, but not to kind of treat it almost like a prescription, which can happen with all kinds of diagnoses sometimes, I observe. And I really love that in Nick Walker's work as well, is that she really talks a lot about those issues that can often come up in these kind of communities and those kind of pitfalls, I guess. So yeah, talking from my own experience, something that I found in doing regular undoing work, and that's the kind of exercises I've been sharing on here, but also weekly or bi-weekly sessions, which are kind of a laying down, more intensive form of it, which I'd really like to get into sharing with some of you at some point. I've been starting to do more of that kind of thing, so watch this space in that regard if you're interested, if you're curious. But what I found is that it really started to help a lot with my mental health and my state of mind. You know, that's not to say, wow, it shifts all the time, you know. I think that I am just made that way, which is another part of this, but I find it much easier now to recognise it, and that's through meditation as well, for sure, through regular meditation. But recognise it for what it is, not feel I have to get to invest in the story. If I do, to drop it, and to just generally feel a little bit more like I can feel things and let them move through, rather than getting kind of stuck there and winding up, you know, in kind of real periods of depression and major anxiety, you know, like I have in the past. And what's interested me is that as that's happened, I haven't found that the kind of executive dysfunction stuff, the getting stuck, not being able to start things, having a block suddenly halfway through and finding it really difficult to finish things, not knowing how to kind of do things in the right order, and that with really simple things sometimes as well as more complex things, but often really simple things, just hasn't got better. And I always kind of assumed that that was a side effect of being a little bit depressed a lot of the time, basically, or a lot depressed some of the time. And I've sort of found that isn't true. That's just a thing that arises in me, or seems to arise in me. Sometimes there'll just be a block over a particular thing and you just can't break through it. And I do find sometimes actually doing those kind of undoing exercises just a little bit at that point, that helps. But also sometimes it's just there, you know? So realising that separation, that's been a really interesting thing for me. And actually sometimes I find that undoing, in particular in my life, has almost been a hindrance actually in that stuff, in the sense that I feel like I've got less of the anxiety to power me through and make me do the thing. But you kind of burn yourself out that way, and it's not in line with what I've discovered the way that I want to live life, certainly, to be about, to just constantly motivate yourself that way, in this kind of push me, pull me, kind of painful, tense way. So yeah, I think what I've had to do is find different ways to really build interest into the things that I do, remember how to do that, and it's a work in progress, you know. I'll be honest, it's a complete work in progress, but it's so much more fulfilling when one does do that, you know, remembering the absolute beauty and detail and curiosity in every single action. That seems like a useful way to do it. So yeah, and another thing that I found really interesting in terms of my own experience with this kind of thing is discovering about rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and the kind of general emotional dysregulation that can often go alongside ADHD and be a part of it. And I feel like that, reading about that, hearing other people talking about that, just kind of describes so much of my life up until getting into undoing, really. And you know, it's still there, but it's very, it is different now, and it remains so. And that's an amazing thing for me about this kind of work, having something to be able to process those kind of stuck emotions in the body with the body, rather than trying to think them out, you know. It makes such a big difference. And yeah, if that's something that you struggle with, I can really recommend that. Also, just being able to feel them in the body, and that helps them start to process themselves if you can allow it to move through you. So I'll link to the little video I did on that, the little short, as well. but we'll be talking loads more about that in coming videos too. So subscribe if that's something of interest to you. Yeah, and that leads me on to the other thing really, which is this thing about natural movement, different kinds of movement. And I feel that we really have restricted ourselves so much in this society and in many human societies from that, and that is probably no good for any of us, you know, but it's something that's really emerged in me since doing the undoing work and just kind of allowing myself rather to, you know, to like move in ways that, you know, well, I would describe as processing energy in the body. You can feel it there and you just kind of let it, you know, move through you in different ways, build it up, break it down. And it feels like that's a big part of what our bodies are here to do. And we've not allowed ourselves to do that part of our humanity in a way. And I think it seems to be a much bigger thing, a much more intense thing for people who are autistic or ADHD. And that's, you know, I found that when I've been doing those movements, a lot of my friends who do stim have described them to me as stimming. They've kind of done it often perhaps in a way that's like letting me know that that's what's going on. And that's really interesting to me. And that's another way to look at it, which is also really beautiful, that it's but it feels like one layer to me of that. I'm so interested in what other people who have those experiences, who do stim, autistic people, ADHD people, other kinds of people who have those experiences too, in what your thoughts and experiences of this are. Do you feel like there's something more to stimming than how people talk about it? You know, it's such a useful way to regulate our emotions and to feel better, but what is that? You know, why? I don't know, it fascinates me. Perhaps it's not something we can, you know, that's okay. It's a continual exploration, and perhaps it doesn't really matter because it does have that effect, but the connection there with this kind of work, yeah, that's really interesting to me. And I do feel very strongly that it exists, and it's something Nick Walker talks about. Again, I was really interested to find that because it was something I've been exploring a lot myself and kind of a little bit with some other people. That, you know, she talks about doing workshops with people that are like encouraging people to be able to do that kind of free movement that she recognizes from stimming herself, and then they're kind of writing to her maybe like months later saying, wow, that's just changed my life. And often these people she's saying aren't necessarily autistic people, and that's really interesting to me, that perhaps, you know, there's a human variance in our need to do these things, and it's much more intense for some of us than for others. I feel like it's pretty intense for me. I feel like it's been really difficult for me in my life, and I could sense, you know, I wrote poetry about this stuff, I could sense that there were ways of doing these things with our bodies, but without any, with having had it kind of shut down just in that normal societal way as a kid, and then without any kind of training in how to open that stuff up, it's very easy to just feel completely lost and completely, you know, you don't even know that that's why, you know, that's a thing. And I do feel like that's probably a thing that is affecting all of us to some degree, and some of us a lot more than others. Yeah, what do you think? My experience was really that it was like I kind of tore away all the shame that I'd always felt about those kind of things, you know, the assumptions that I had in my mind about what it was about, or just the fear of it, because it was like not how you're supposed to move, what you're supposed to do, you know, and then suddenly it all just bubbled up. Yeah, fascinating. And something that this directly connects up to actually is I'm really interested in what neurotypicality is, you know. I was really into Nick Walker's thoughts on this as well, which were that it, you know, it's not that some people just are innately neurotypical. Like, neurotypical is a changeable thing according to our society's expectations, because really what that is that is a person whose physiology and neurology and whatever else we are made of, you know, in our bodies and our minds and our spirits, enables them to take on society's programming in a way that feels normal to them, you know, and that looks normal to other people, and that where they can kind of play that game, and that perhaps they don't even realise they're playing a game. It feels very natural to them. It feels like that's just the natural way of things, and that various neurodivergences are people who are not like the way that society's programming worked on them kind of makes them act in all sorts of ways that are not that, and feel in all sorts of ways that are not that. And even if you're sort of masking and you're doing an okay job of acting neurotypical, there's all sorts of little holes and ways that's going to be eating away at your system in much more intense ways than it is for somebody else. But what that means, and I'm interested in that, is that there's no such, you know, while there are, you know, the map's not the territory and all that, but there are autistic people, say, there are ADHD people, say, there's no such thing as a neurotypical person exactly. That's kind of how you were able to respond to the programming of your society. It'd be very different in different societies with different programming and expectations, and that's really interesting to me. And it also means that those ways of acting, you know, they're probably not particularly beneficial for neurotypical people either. It's just that they're more doable, you know, they're more get onable with, but that doesn't mean that that's actually optimal, you know. And yeah, carrying on, this is a bit of a monster one, isn't it? If you're still with us, that's fantastic. I really love something else which Nick talks about, which is the neurodiversity paradigm. And that's really talking about looking at neurodiversity as a complete paradigm shift, realising that it's not pathological, like we're meant to be here, you know, this is our world too. And there always have been and are meant to be lots of variations in what it is to be a human being. And that's a beautiful thing. And it can be disabling to be neurodivergent in this society, in this world, because it's not set up for people like us, and it is set up quite specifically for people who have absorbed the programming in the correct ways and are behaving in the ways that it's been set up to do. You know, it makes sense, really, doesn't it? But what if we were to imagine a society to do little and big bits of work towards creating a society where we did all acknowledge the beauty and usefulness and value, power in having all of these different kinds of ways of being in the world, and therefore we created space for all of them to flourish, and we listened to each other and we worked on that, you know, made things in a way that wasn't one size fits all, incorporated spaces for different kinds of social needs, sensory needs, didn't shame people for moving their bodies in different ways. What if we actually did it a different way? And I really love that. You know, obviously when you put it like that, it's pretty utopian. I've always had a bit of a utopian streak to me, but I think there are really small things we can do in our own lives all the time, looking at things that way. And I think that also in ourselves, you know, just valuing it's not a pathology, it's a beautiful part of human expression, part of the universe, you know. I love that. Yeah, the sun's going down at the moment, gonna just show you that quickly. It's pretty great out here. So yeah, what do you think? I feel like finding these ways to explore, describe, get some deeper understanding of our experience, whilst doing so in the service of liberation, whilst not restricting ourselves, not allowing it to be a restriction, allowing it to be an opening, you know, something that, you know, a map can be really useful, right? It's not the territory, but can help you find your way. but you've always got to be aware of the ways in which it's, if you just look at the map, if you wander around just looking at Google Maps, you miss so much of what's around you. But you might get there, and maybe the best thing to do is to be able to have some balance in that experience between the two, So for me, I'm excited by this stuff. I'm excited about exploring deeper with it, finding some of the juicy bits that may not be in the conventional paradigms around it, and really exploring what these parts of myself, these parts of ourselves that have seemed shameful, what they actually have to offer now that we know that they're not, that they're a part of our expression in this world, and they're beautiful things. So yeah, I'm gonna leave you with a little exercise that you can try if you like. May be useful to you whether or not you consider yourself to be neurodivergent, and yeah, give yourself some space around it. It might be best to do, if you've got a bit of time afterwards, just to kind of settle with it and process it. But what you want to do is take some deep breaths, do a quick body scan, or take longer over that if that feels good. I'll link to the meditation video as well in the description. That gives a really good detailed description of a body scan, and just get into that kind of softened, more sort of meditative state, and feel into your body. And as you do, after a while, when it feels like the moment, ask your body, is there anything that it wants to do? Is there any movement that it wants to make? Is there any kind of shift? Is there any part of your body that particularly wants your attention and wants to move in a particular way? And once you can feel that there is something, just allow that to start to happen. Keep breathing, keep focused on your presence, and just allow it to do what it wants to do, allow it to move itself. And this may involve getting up, moving around your space. This may just be a little part of you that wants to move. But just breathe and allow that to happen for a while. And you can set a timer before this. You can decide to kind of put a limit on it, or you can just allow it for as long as feels right to you. And then when it's over, be gentle. You can try telling that part of yourself that you'll return to this processing, or just give yourself a little moment to breathe and come back to your kind of more regular consciousness afterwards. And then it might be helpful to journal a bit afterwards. If you've had, you might find some senses of what's happening, or images or thoughts might occur to you in this process. It can be a useful thing to journal about that afterwards, or just kind of sit and give yourself a little bit of time and space, see what emerges in the time after that. I actually did a kind of slightly more intense led through version of this exercise, and that was something that enabled me to start making these videos at all. So yeah, see how you get on with it. I can recommend doing things like that. And yeah, please let me know in the comments your thoughts and experiences around neurodiversity, stimming, body work and processing in relation to neurodivergence. It's a big topic and a hot topic, and I'm aware of that, and I've had a lot of blocks around creating this video, but I'm really glad to be doing it and sharing it with you. So yeah, thanks very much for being here with me, superstars, and happy new year, happy 2023, and I'll see you very soon. Loads and loads of love. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff if it appeals to you. All right, thanks very much, loads of love, bye bye.